The first rays of sunrise spread across the mountains of Yellowstone National Park. A thin layer of morning mist drifted quietly through the towering pine forest. Birdsong echoed across the valleys. Bear Creek flowed gently over moss-covered rocks. It should have been another peaceful morning. Forest Ranger Daniel Brooks started the engine of his Green National Park Service pickup truck. In the passenger seat, Max, a majestic 6-year-old black and tan German Shepherd, was already sitting upright. Daniel smiled. Ready, old buddy. Max gently wagged his tail. The truck rolled onto the familiar patrol road. On both sides of the trail, herds of deer grazed peacefully. Several squirrels darted through the trees, searching for pine cones. The mountain air was so fresh that Daniel paused to take a deep breath. These mornings were his favorite. No emergency calls, no lost hikers, no dangerous weather. Just nature slowly waking up. But the peaceful morning didn't last long. The radio on the dashboard suddenly crackled. Daniel. Where are you, Daniel? Picked up the radio. I'm patrolling near Bear Creek. The dispatcher answered immediately. We've received 3 reports in the last 10 minutes, all from the same location. Daniel frowned. What's happening? A mother bear keeps showing up around the Bear Creek campground. She refuses to leave. The visitors are getting frightened. Daniel glanced toward Max. The German Shepherd had already lifted his head. His ears stood straight. Has she attacked anyone? Not yet. But she keeps walking around the campground, very close to the campsites. People are afraid to leave their tents. Daniel immediately turned the truck around. Close the campground. I'm on my way. Copy that. The pickup accelerated along the forest road. Only a few minutes later, Daniel reached the entrance to Bear Creek Campground. The atmosphere was completely different from usual. Park staff were helping visitors board shuttle buses. Some families clutched their backpacks tightly. Others kept staring nervously toward the forest. As Daniel stepped out of the truck, a park ranger hurried over. Thanks for coming. She's still there. Daniel followed the direction she pointed. At the edge of the forest, a large female grizzly bear slowly walked between the trees. She was only about 50 meters away, but something immediately caught Daniel's attention. The bear wasn't searching through trash bins. She wasn't looking for food. She wasn't moving toward people. Instead, she kept pacing back and forth. Every few moments, she stopped, lifted her head toward the deeper forest, then let out a soft, low call, almost as if she were calling for someone. Daniel raised his binoculars. The bear looked thinner than expected. Mud covered much of her fur. Her front paws were coated with fresh, wet soil, as though she had been digging for hours. Max quietly stepped out of the truck, but he didn't bark. He simply stood still. His eyes never left the mother bear. Daniel studied his partner. Normally, whenever a wild animal became aggressive, Max would immediately give a warning. This time, he remained perfectly calm. His head tilted slightly. His ears constantly shifted, listening, as though he could hear something far away. One of the campers cautiously approached Daniel. His voice was still shaking. Ranger, she's been here since before sunrise. She just keeps walking around the campground. I thought she was going to charge. Daniel nodded, but she never did. The man looked surprised. You're right. She only keeps looking toward the forest. Daniel turned his binoculars back toward the bear. Just then, the mother bear raised her head. She released another deep, worried, mournful call, then slowly looked toward the northern hills. Max's ears instantly stood upright. He quietly took a few steps forward. His eyes remained fixed in exactly the same direction. Daniel felt that something wasn't right. He spoke softly. She's not here looking for food. He stared into the vast forest, then looked at Max. She's looking for someone. Max let out a faint whine, as if agreeing. Deep inside the northern forest, a gentle breeze swept through the pine trees, carrying a sound so faint no human could possibly hear it. But Max turned his head directly toward it. Daniel signaled for the park staff to continue evacuating the campground. Nobody stays behind. Keep everyone away from the edge of the forest." The staff immediately followed his instructions. Within a few minutes, the once busy campground was almost empty. The mother bear remained at the edge of the trees. She didn't move any closer. She didn't leave either. She simply kept staring into the deeper forest. Daniel raised his binoculars, watching carefully. Every so often, the bear lowered her head to sniff the ground, then lifted it again, releasing another short call. Each time she did, Max's ears stood upright, listening intently. Daniel realized something. Those weren't warning growls. They sounded more like a mother desperately calling for her cubs. He turned to one of the park rangers. "The first 3 emergency calls. How far apart were they?" "About 20 minutes. Each caller said the bear appeared, then disappeared again." Daniel nodded slowly. "She isn't choosing targets. She's searching." At that moment, Max slowly started walking toward the forest, quietly, without barking. Daniel gently held the leash. "Easy, buddy." Max stopped, but his eyes never left the woods. A gentle breeze drifted through the trees. Max immediately lifted his nose, breathing deeply, sampling every scent carried by the wind. Then, without hesitation, he turned toward an old trail to the left. Daniel followed him. The trail had been closed for several months. After a powerful rainstorm, part of the hillside above it had collapsed. Park officials had closed the area because it was considered unsafe. Daniel looked at the warning sign, then looked at Max. "You think something's over there, Max?" let out a quiet whine, still staring down the abandoned trail. Daniel opened the park map on his tablet. The trail led toward a narrow, rocky ravine. Very few visitors even knew it existed. Hardly anyone ever went there anymore. Just then, a maintenance worker hurried over. "Daniel, I just remembered something. 2 days ago, a severe rainstorm hit that area. Several large trees came down." Daniel looked toward the hillside. If there had been a landslide, the entire landscape could have changed. He turned back toward the mother bear. She was still standing in the same place, completely ignoring the people. Her eyes remained fixed on the forest. Then she called again. This time, the sound lasted longer, filled with worry. Max answered with the faintest whine. The mother bear immediately turned toward him. Their eyes met. There was no aggression, no intention to attack, only caution, and something that almost looked like hope. Daniel had never witnessed anything like it. He knelt beside Max, gently resting a hand on the German shepherd's neck. "Can you hear something too?" Max looked at Daniel, then slowly turned toward the closed trail again. This time, he started walking faster, as though he knew exactly where they needed to go. Daniel stood still for a few seconds. Every possibility raced through his mind. If the bear cubs were truly trapped somewhere, every minute mattered. He made his decision. Called 2 more rangers, but no tranquilizer rifles. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "No tranquilizers," Daniel shook his head. "If I'm right, the mother bear isn't the danger. She's asking for help in the only way she knows." No one argued. Daniel put on his rescue backpack, checked his climbing rope, his flashlight, his first aid kit, then looked at Max. "Let's go." Max immediately took the lead, heading straight down the abandoned trail. Behind them, the mother bear remained where she was, quietly watching. Then, for the first time since sunrise, she slowly began following them, keeping a respectful distance, as though she had placed her last hope in Daniel and Max. The abandoned trail quickly swallowed the 3 rescuers into the dense rainforest. The morning sunlight barely filtered through the towering trees of the Atlantic forest. The air grew noticeably cooler. The birds gradually fell silent. Replacing them was the distant sound of water flowing through a rocky ravine ahead. Max led the way. His pace was slow, but confident. His nose remained pointed forward every few moments. He stopped, carefully sniffed the ground, then continued. Daniel and the two park rangers followed closely behind. No one spoke. Everyone understood that any loud noise might frighten the mother bear behind them. The bear quietly followed, always staying more than 30 meters away, close enough to watch them, far enough not to make anyone feel threatened. Daniel had never seen a bear behave like this before. He spoke softly. "She isn't following us. She's waiting." One of the rangers whispered, "Do you think she knows we're trying to help?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at Max. "I don't know." But Max seems to understand. The trail became more difficult with every step. Several large trees had been uprooted during the storm a few days earlier. The ground was still soft. Some sections sank beneath their boots. Daniel crouched to examine the muddy trail. There were numerous tracks, the mother's footprints crossing over one another. She had walked back and forth countless times. Then he noticed another set of tracks, much smaller. Daniel called the other rangers over. "Come take a look." They all knelt beside him. Clearly visible in the mud were two tiny sets of paw prints. One ranger smiled. "Bear cubs." Daniel nodded. "There are two of them. They were traveling with their mother." He continued following the tracks. At first, all three sets stayed together, but the closer they came to the ravine, the stranger the trail became. The mother's tracks suddenly became chaotic. She had wandered in circles, searching the area over and over, but the two smaller tracks suddenly disappeared. Daniel froze. They vanished here. One ranger looked around. But where could they have gone? At that moment, Max gently pulled on his leash. He walked straight toward a massive pile of rocks and fallen earth blocking the trail. It was the clear aftermath of a landslide. Huge tree trunks lay scattered everywhere. Boulders and loose soil completely covered the path. Max jumped onto a large rock, standing perfectly still. His ears stood tall. Daniel stepped closer. "What did you find?" Max didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed downward. Daniel leaned over. Between two enormous boulders, he noticed a narrow opening, almost completely hidden by bushes. Without getting close, no one would ever have seen it. A cold breeze drifted upward from the darkness below. Daniel took out his flashlight, shining it into the opening. All he could see was darkness. The crevice was much deeper than he had expected. One ranger dropped a small pebble into it. Several long seconds passed before they finally heard it strike the bottom. "That's a long way down." Daniel nodded. Just then, Max slowly lay down beside the opening, pressing his head close to the rocks. His ears twitched constantly. Then, he let out a quiet whine. Daniel immediately raised a hand. Everyone fell silent. Several seconds passed. At first, no one heard anything. Then, from deep below, came a faint sound, almost like the tiny cry of a young animal. Very distant, very weak, but unmistakably real. The two rangers looked at each other. "Did you hear that?" Daniel slowly nodded. "That's a cub." Behind them, the mother bear suddenly stood upright. She faced the rocky crevice, then released a long, heartbreaking call for the first time. The faint sound from below answered immediately. This time it was clearer. Then another tiny cry followed. Daniel felt his heart pounding. He looked at Max. "You found them." Max remained lying beside the narrow opening. His tail wagged gently, as though he already knew their last hope was still alive. Deep below, Daniel knelt beside the edge of the rocky crevice. The faint cries from below continued to echo upward in short intervals. They weren't loud, but they were enough to tell everyone the two bear cubs were still alive. He picked up his radio. "Command, this is Daniel. I've located the two cubs. It appears they're trapped inside a deep rock crevice." The dispatcher responded immediately. "Are they injured?" Daniel stared into the darkness below. "I can't confirm yet, but they're still calling. I need the technical rescue team. They're about 30 minutes away." Daniel slowly shook his head. 30 minutes is too long. He switched off the radio, silently studying the terrain. The opening in the rocks was less than a meter wide, but it widened considerably farther down. One of the rangers stepped closer. "Are you planning to go down there?" Daniel nodded. "If we wait for the rescue team, it may already be too late." He examined several large trees whose roots still held firmly to the hillside, then secured his climbing rope around the trunk of an ancient tree. The two rangers carefully checked every knot. No one wanted to take unnecessary risks, but everyone understood. There was no other choice. Just then, the mother bear cautiously stepped a little closer. She was now less than 20 meters away. The two rangers immediately became tense. One whispered, "She's coming." Daniel calmly raised his hand. "Don't panic." The bear stopped. She didn't growl. She didn't stand upright. She showed no sign of aggression. She simply stared at the rocky crevice, then called again. This time, two tiny voices answered almost immediately from below. Daniel looked at Max. "Stay here. Keep calm." Max let out a soft whine, then obediently sat beside the edge of the crevice. His eyes never left the darkness below. Daniel put on his climbing helmet, locked his safety carabiner onto the rope, then slowly lowered himself into the narrow opening, one careful step at a time. Small rocks and loose dirt tumbled into the darkness beneath him. The deeper he descended, the darker it became. Only the beam from his headlamp pierced the shadows. About 10 meters below, the narrow crevice suddenly opened into a natural chamber. Daniel stopped, sweeping his flashlight across the rocky walls. Then, something moved. A pair of tiny eyes reflected the light. Then another pair. The two bear cubs, curled tightly together on a narrow rock ledge. Their fur was soaked with mud. They looked exhausted, but both were awake. The moment they saw Daniel, they let out weak little cries. Daniel smiled gently. "It's okay. I'm going to get you out." High above, Max suddenly jumped to his feet. His ears stood straight up. The mother bear also took another step, not toward Daniel, but toward the hillside above. She lifted her head, sniffing the air. Max did exactly the same. A few seconds later, Daniel heard it too. A faint sound, small rocks rolling somewhere above the slope. One ranger looked uphill. His face suddenly turned pale. "Daniel, the hillside is moving again." Daniel looked up. Tiny grains of soil began falling around the climbing rope. He immediately realized the rescue had just become far more dangerous. Small grains of dirt continued falling around Daniel. He gripped the climbing rope tightly, looking up toward the surface. Above him, the two park rangers had also noticed what was happening. One of them shouted down, "Daniel, some of the rocks are starting to crack." Daniel answered calmly, "Keep the rope tight. Don't let anyone get close to the edge." "Understood." He looked back at the two bear cubs. They were huddled together, letting out weak little cries. Daniel knew if he tried to rescue both cubs at the same time, it would take too long. He would have to bring them up one by one. He opened his rescue pack, taking out a soft thermal rescue blanket. He carefully spread it across the narrow rock ledge. At first, the cubs backed away, frightened. Daniel stayed perfectly still. He didn't move any closer. He spoke in a calm, gentle voice. "It's okay. You're safe now." Several minutes passed. One of the cubs slowly stepped forward, carefully sniffing Daniel's hand. Above the crevice, Max remained quietly seated, without making a sound, simply watching. Perhaps Max's calm presence helped the frightened cubs feel less afraid. Daniel slowly wrapped the first cub inside the rescue blanket, holding it securely against his chest, then attached an additional safety strap around both of them. He looked upward. Pull slowly. The two rangers began lifting the rope. It grew tighter with every second. Daniel held the cub firmly, making sure it stayed calm. Meter by meter, they slowly rose toward the surface. When they were only a few meters below the opening, suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoed across the hillside. Crack, a large boulder broke loose. It slammed into the rocky wall beside the crevice. Loose rocks and dirt exploded in every direction. "Stop!" Daniel shouted. Everyone immediately froze. A thick cloud of dust filled the narrow shaft. Above them, Max stepped directly in front of the opening, watching every shifting rock. The mother bear also lifted her head. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She simply stared toward the unstable hillside, waiting to see what would happen next. Several tense seconds passed. Then, everything became quiet again. Daniel took a deep breath. "Keep going." The two rangers pulled a little faster. Finally, the first cub reached the surface safely. The moment its paws touched the ground, it turned toward the forest, letting out a tiny cry. The mother bear answered immediately. This time, her voice sounded completely different. The desperation was gone. It was filled with relief. Max never left his position. He looked down toward Daniel. His tail wagged gently, almost as if encouraging him to come back. Daniel smiled. One more to go. He unclipped his safety harness, then slowly lowered himself back into the rocky chamber for the second time. This time, the remaining cub didn't back away. It looked at Daniel, then looked toward the light above, as though it finally understood. The way back to its mother was waiting right above it. Daniel lowered himself into the crevice for the second time. The rope tightened gently as his boots touched the narrow rock ledge. The beam from his helmet swept across the small chamber. Only one cub remained. It stood perfectly still, no longer trying to hide in the shadows. Its tiny eyes stayed fixed on Daniel. Then it looked up toward the light shining through the opening above, almost as if it had seen its sibling safely lifted out. Daniel smiled. "It's time to go home." He slowly walked closer, making no sudden movements. The cub took a cautious step backward, then stopped. It lowered its head, carefully sniffing the thermal rescue blanket in Daniel's hands. A few seconds later, the little cub quietly stepped onto the blanket by itself. Daniel let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Good job." He gently wrapped the blanket around the cub's small body, secured the safety strap, then reached for his radio. "I'm ready." "Begin lifting." Above him, the two park rangers answered together. "Copy that." The rope slowly became tight. Daniel held the cub securely against his chest. This time, everyone moved even more carefully. No one wanted to create additional vibrations along the unstable hillside. Meter by meter, Daniel and the cub slowly rose toward the surface. When they were only about 4 meters below the opening, a powerful gust of wind suddenly swept across the hillside. The surrounding trees rustled loudly. Max immediately jumped to his feet, his eyes fixed on the top of the slope. The mother bear also lifted her head, constantly sniffing the air. Daniel noticed small pebbles beginning to roll down once again. He shouted immediately. "Stop pulling!" The two rangers froze, holding the rope perfectly still. No one moved. Everyone held their breath. Several long seconds passed. A large tree high on the hillside leaned slightly. Then, it stopped moving. No more rocks fell. Daniel slowly exhaled. "Keep going." This time, it took less than a minute. The second cub finally reached the surface safely. The moment its paws touched solid ground, it immediately ran toward the familiar sound calling from the forest. The mother bear stepped forward. Then, she stopped. She didn't rush toward them. She remained completely calm. The two cubs ran as fast as their tiny legs could carry them. Only seconds later, they reached their mother. The bear lowered her head, carefully sniffing each cub, making certain that both of them were safe. The cubs rubbed their heads gently against her neck, letting out soft, joyful cries. The sight left every ranger speechless. No one said a word. Daniel climbed out of the crevice, brushing the dust from his clothes. He quietly watched the reunited bear family. The mother bear slowly lifted her head. Her eyes rested on Daniel, then shifted toward Max. For several silent seconds, no one moved. Finally, the mother bear slowly turned around. The two cubs immediately followed her. The little family quietly disappeared toward the forest. Just then, one of the cubs suddenly looked back. It glanced at Max, briefly stood on its hind legs, then quickly ran after its mother. Max gently wagged his tail, watching until all three bears vanished among the trees. Daniel smiled. Maybe that was the most beautiful thank you we've ever received. But just as everyone prepared to head back, the radio on Daniel's shoulder suddenly crackled. "Daniel, we have an urgent update." The dispatcher's voice sounded tense. Daniel immediately picked up the radio. "I'm listening. We've just detected a rapidly developing storm upstream. If you don't leave the ravine immediately, the rising floodwater could cut off your only way out." Daniel looked up toward the sky. Dark storm clouds were moving in much faster than he had expected. The rescue wasn't over yet. Daniel didn't waste another second. He clipped the radio back onto his shoulder and looked toward the sky. Dark storm clouds were spreading rapidly across the mountains upstream. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the rainforest. It was still distant, but it was enough to tell him that the storm was moving in far faster than expected. He turned to the two park rangers. "We need to get out of this ravine now, as fast as we can." Both rangers immediately began packing their equipment. The climbing rope was quickly coiled. The rescue gear was secured. Each of them checked the ground carefully to make sure nothing important had been left behind. Max was already standing at the entrance to the old trail, looking toward the only way out. It was almost as if he understood that every second now mattered. Daniel gave a short whistle. "Let's move." The three rescuers immediately picked up their pace. The narrow trail had already been difficult before. After several days of heavy rain, it had become even more dangerous. Mud covered almost every step. Large fallen trees blocked sections of the path. Several times they had to climb over enormous trunks before continuing. Off to their left, through the dense trees, the reunited bear family was moving quietly in the same direction. The mother bear occasionally glanced back toward Daniel and Max, then gently encouraged her cubs deeper into the safety of the forest. Daniel smiled. At least they're safe now. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful again, but nature wasn't finished testing them. Less than 10 minutes later, the first raindrops began falling through the forest canopy. At first, only a few scattered drops, then more. Within moments, rain tapped against countless leaves overhead. The entire forest grew noticeably darker. One of the rangers looked toward the sky. "This isn't good. The storm's moving much faster than the forecast." Daniel nodded. "Stay close. No one gets separated." Max suddenly stopped. His ears shot straight into the air. Instead of looking toward the trail, he turned sharply toward a small hillside on the right. His nose worked constantly, drawing in every scent carried by the wind. Daniel walked over. "What is it, Max?" The German Shepherd didn't move. He remained completely focused on the base of a large fallen tree. Then, a tiny sound drifted through the rain. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a bird. It was something else. The two rangers exchanged puzzled glances. What was that? Daniel carefully stepped around the fallen trunk. Behind it, clinging tightly to a broken branch, was a tiny three-toed sloth. The little animal was soaked by the rain. Its wet fur clung to its body. It trembled from the cold. Daniel slowly knelt beside it. It must have been separated from its mother during the last storm. The little sloth looked exhausted. It barely had enough strength to hold on. Daniel sighed softly. This has certainly been a busy day. With great care, he lifted the broken branch, then gently placed the young sloth onto the sturdy trunk of a nearby tree. The little animal slowly wrapped its long claws around the bark. After a few hesitant moments, it began climbing upward, higher and higher. until it disappeared safely among the thick green leaves. Max gave a gentle wag of his tail, almost as if approving of one more successful rescue. Daniel smiled. "All right, now let's get out of here." The rain grew heavier. Water streamed across the trail. Small rivulets quickly became flowing channels of muddy water. Within only a few minutes, the narrow creek they had crossed earlier that morning looked completely different. The water level had risen dramatically. The current was much stronger. White water surged around the rocks. One ranger stared at it nervously. "If we're much later, we won't be able to cross." Daniel didn't hesitate. "We cross now." He stepped toward the edge of the creek. The others followed close behind. Max suddenly moved ahead, scanning both banks, watching every movement around them. Then, a deep roar echoed from somewhere upstream. It wasn't thunder. It was louder, lower, and growing rapidly. Daniel froze. His eyes shot toward the upper valley. Through the curtain of rain, he saw it. A massive wall of muddy water rushing down the narrow channel, dragging branches, logs, and broken trees with it. His heart pounded. He shouted at the top of his lungs. "Flash, flood, everybody get to higher ground." Max reacted instantly. The German Shepherd leaped onto the nearest rocky bank, then spun around. Standing beside Daniel, waiting for the others, the roaring water was racing toward them with terrifying speed. They had only seconds left to escape before the entire crossing disappeared beneath the raging flood. "Hurry!" Daniel shouted as a wall of muddy water thundered into the creek with terrifying force. The roar echoed through the entire valley. Massive tree trunks slammed into one another with deafening cracks. The two park rangers immediately scrambled up the rocky hillside. Max stayed beside Daniel. He didn't run ahead. Instead, the German Shepherd kept glancing back at his partner, almost as if he refused to leave without him. "Come on, Max." The moment Daniel called his name, Max sprang up the rocky slope. Daniel followed only a step behind. Barely seconds later, the flash flood swept across the exact spot where they had been standing. The quiet little creek they had crossed earlier that morning was gone. In its place was a raging torrent. The muddy water twisted violently through the narrow valley. It carried broken branches, huge logs, heavy rocks, and countless pieces of shattered timber. The three rescuers reached a high, rocky ledge. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply stared at the incredible force of nature below. One ranger finally let out a long breath. "If we'd been only a few seconds slower," Daniel nodded, "we wouldn't have made it." The rain continued pouring down. Water rushed from every hillside. The old trail had completely disappeared beneath the muddy current. Their original route back to the ranger station no longer existed. One ranger unfolded a waterproof map. "We can't return the way we came." Daniel studied the surrounding terrain. If they follow the higher ridgeline, there was another patrol road on the opposite side of the valley. Reaching it would require hiking nearly 3 more kilometers. Under normal conditions, it would have been a manageable walk. But after the storm, every step would be difficult. He made his decision. "We stay on the ridge. Higher ground is safer." Everyone agreed immediately. The group continued climbing. In many places, the trail no longer existed. They pushed through thick vines, pulled themselves upward using exposed tree roots. Slippery rocks made every step uncertain. Max continued leading the way. His ears constantly scanned the forest. His nose searched every shifting breeze. Nearly 20 minutes passed. The rain gradually became lighter. A blanket of mist settled across the rainforest. Daniel stopped for a moment. He removed the GPS unit from his backpack. After several seconds, he frowned. "The signal is weak." Towering cliffs blocked the satellite connection. The screen repeatedly lost their location. At that exact moment, Max suddenly changed direction. Instead of following the route Daniel had chosen, he turned onto a narrow path, almost hidden beneath hanging vines. One ranger called after him, "Max butt." The German Shepherd kept walking. Without hesitation, Daniel watched him for several seconds, then smiled. "Let him lead." The younger ranger looked uncertain. But that's not on the map. Daniel clipped the GPS back onto his pack. It doesn't have to be. I've trusted Max for years. And he's never taken me the wrong way. The group followed the dog. The narrow passage wound quietly through towering trees. Eventually, the dense vegetation began to thin. Sunlight slowly filtered through the clouds. After another 10 minutes, the forest suddenly opened. A wide gravel patrol road appeared directly ahead. The rangers stopped in surprise. Daniel laughed softly. "There it is," one ranger looked back toward the forest. "This road is actually closer than the one shown on our map." Daniel knelt beside Max, gently scratching behind the German shepherd's ears. "I told you. You always know the way." Max looked up at him. His tail wagged happily. Just then, the sound of an engine echoed through the quiet forest. A green ICM Bio Patrol pickup emerged around a bend in the road. The truck slowed to a stop. Another park ranger jumped out. "Daniel, we've been searching everywhere for you." Daniel smiled. "We're all right, thanks to Max." The ranger looked down at the German shepherd, then shook his head with a smile. "I should have known." Everyone climbed into the truck. As the vehicle began driving along the gravel road, Daniel looked back through the rain-speckled window. Far away, standing on a rocky ridge beyond the mist, he saw the mother bear one last time. Her two cubs played happily around her feet. The mother bear remained perfectly still, watching the truck for a few quiet seconds. Then she slowly turned, leading her cubs into the safety of the rainforest. Within moments, the three bears disappeared among the towering trees. Daniel smiled quietly. "They're finally home." Max rested his head gently on Daniel's arm, letting out a contented sigh. Daniel stroked the soft fur on his head. "And it's time for us to go home too." The truck continued along the forest road. Behind them, the rain finally stopped. Golden afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds. Its warm rays illuminated the rainforest after the storm. A faint rainbow slowly appeared above the distant hills. Daniel watched it through the window. He realized this day had been about far more than rescuing two lost bear cubs. It had reminded him that in the wilderness, fear is often nothing more than desperation waiting to be understood. Sometimes, all it takes is a little patience, a little compassion, and the courage to trust one another. When that happens, even humans and wild animals can overcome the most difficult moments together. 2 days after the storm, the skies above Yellowstone National Park were clear once again. Warm morning sunlight filtered gently through the rain-soaked rainforest. The fresh scent of wet earth filled the air. Birdsong echoed through the trees as if the forest itself were celebrating another peaceful day. Nature had recovered with remarkable speed. Back at the ranger station, Daniel and the other park rangers were reviewing reports from the recent storm. Several hiking trails had been blocked by fallen trees. A few small wooden footbridges would need repairs. Fortunately, not a single visitor had been injured. Daniel closed the final report with a quiet smile. Things could have ended very differently. Just then, his radio crackled. "Daniel, someone is here to see you." Outside the station, a family of 4 stood waiting. They were the same visitors who had been camping near the forest 2 days earlier. The father stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. "We're heading home today, but before we leave, we wanted to thank you." Daniel smiled politely. "You don't have to. We were simply doing our job." The mother gently shook her head. "No. If you hadn't understood what that mother bear was trying to tell everyone, the ending might have been completely different." Their young daughter, about 10 years old, slowly walked toward Max. She wrapped her arms around the German shepherd in a warm hug. "I'm going to miss you, Max." Max gently wagged his tail, then softly licked her hand. Everyone laughed. Inside the small wooden box was a brand new blue rubber ball. The father smiled. "We heard Max loves chasing tennis balls." Daniel laughed. "That's absolutely true. You couldn't have picked a better gift." The little girl tossed the ball across the grassy yard. Max exploded into action. racing after it with incredible speed. Only moments later, he returned proudly, holding the new ball in his mouth. His tail wagged so hard that everyone burst into laughter again. For a few peaceful minutes, the ranger station echoed with nothing but smiles and laughter. That afternoon, Daniel climbed into the familiar green ICMBO patrol truck. Max immediately jumped into the passenger seat. The new blue ball rested between his paws. They began another routine patrol through the rainforest. As they approached the area where the landslide had occurred, Daniel slowed the truck. The road had already been cleared. Engineering crews were reinforcing the unstable hillside. Heavy equipment worked carefully without disturbing the surrounding forest. Nature would always continue changing, and the people who protected it would continue adapting alongside it. Just then, Max suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked forward. Daniel looked toward the forest. Far away, on a sunny, grassy hillside, 3 familiar figures appeared: the mother bear and her 2 cubs. This time, the cubs looked completely different. They were healthy, energetic. They chased each other through the tall grass, sometimes tumbling playfully across the hillside before running back to their mother. The mother bear watched quietly, then slowly raised her head. Her eyes met Daniel's across the distance. They were far too far apart for any sound to travel between them. But Daniel smiled anyway. He simply raised one hand in a silent farewell. The mother bear remained still for several seconds, then quietly turned away, leading her cubs back into the safety of the rainforest. Within moments, the 3 bears disappeared among the towering trees. Daniel started the engine again. The patrol truck continued along the peaceful forest road. Max rested his head against the open window, enjoying the cool breeze. Daniel glanced toward his 4-legged partner. "You saved another family." Max simply wagged his tail. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. He simply did what he had always done: protect those who needed help, day after day. Without expecting anything in return, Daniel smiled as the truck disappeared beneath the towering green canopy. Tomorrow, another patrol would begin. Another unexpected adventure might be waiting somewhere in the vast rainforest. And just as always, Daniel knew he would never face it alone, because beside him, there would always be one loyal German shepherd, ready to follow his heart, ready to help, ready to remind everyone that true heroes rarely seek attention. They simply show up, exactly when someone needs them most. 1 week later, the rainy season had finally passed. Clear blue skies stretched above Yellowstone National Park once again. Golden morning sunlight filtered through the towering trees. Birdsong echoed across the valley. The creek that had become a raging torrent during the storm now flowed peacefully once more. Life in the rainforest had returned to its familiar rhythm. Daniel and Max began another routine morning patrol. Their green ICMBio pickup truck rolled slowly along the forest road. There were no emergency calls, no rescue alarms, only the sound of birds, the gentle breeze, and the fresh scent of the rainforest after the rain. Daniel smiled. "I hope today stays this peaceful." Max sat comfortably in the passenger seat. The blue rubber ball rested between his paws. His tail gave a slow, contented wag. It was almost as if he agreed. As they passed the hillside where the landslide had happened, Daniel slowed the truck. Young trees had already been planted. The damaged slope had been reinforced. The hiking trail was open again. Everywhere they looked, there were signs of a new beginning. Just then, Max lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the forest. Daniel looked in the same direction. Far away, on a sunlit meadow, the mother bear and her 2 cubs were quietly searching for food. The cubs had already grown stronger. They chased one another through the tall grass, sometimes tumbling playfully before running back to their mother. The bear calmly watched them, then slowly raised her head. For a few silent seconds, she looked toward Daniel and Max. There was no fear, no panic, only peace. Daniel raised one hand in a quiet farewell. A moment later, the mother bear gently turned away, leading her cubs back into the forest. Soon, The three bears disappeared beneath the towering trees. Daniel started the engine again. The truck continued its slow journey through the rainforest. He glanced at Max and smiled. Maybe that's the best ending we could ever ask for. Not another rescue, but seeing life return to normal. Max gently rested his head against Daniel's arm. The forest stretched peacefully ahead. There would be more patrols, more unexpected challenges, and perhaps more lives waiting to be saved. But Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. As long as Max was beside him, he would never face those challenges alone. Sometimes, a single act of kindness, a little patience, or simply taking the time to understand nature can change the future of an entire family. That is why, every morning, the green patrol truck quietly leaves the ranger station, with Daniel behind the wheel and Max faithfully sitting beside him, always ready for the next adventure.